Thank you for joining the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bonneville Power Administration for our Columbia River System Operations Environmental Impact Statement Public Scoping Webinar. I am Rebecca Weiss with the Army Corps of Engineers. Here with me today is Dave Kennedy with the Bonneville Power Administration and Sonia Kokos with the Bureau of Reclamation. We will be your host for today's meeting. These electronic meetings are being hosted for those who are unable to attend one of the 16 face-to-face meetings scheduled across the Pacific Northwest. An introductory video and a presentation on the current system operations in the Columbia River Basin will be provided with a question and answer session following. The agencies have numerous subject matter experts available today to answer your questions regarding how we currently operate the Columbia River system. Once today's webinar has concluded, participants are encouraged to submit comments for the scoping of this study. The instructions will be submitted to submit comments will be on the screen at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the CRSO website at www.crso.info. Your questions will be captured as part of the webinar record, and your participation acknowledges your consent to be included. For the convenience of the webinar participants, the final slide in this presentation includes contact information for agency public affairs representatives, our 1-800 number, and our information request email address.
And with that, we will go ahead and launch the first video.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bonneville Power Administration welcome your participation in the environmental review of Columbia River System Operations, also referred to as CRSO. This environmental review is to analyze the operations and impacts of 14 Columbia River Basin dams, reservoirs, and their related facilities that make up the CRSO. As required by the National Environmental Policy Act, this period of gathering information called scoping is the first of several opportunities for you to share your comments on alternatives or different options for managing Columbia River System operations. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bonneville Power Administration will use the comments gathered during scoping to develop an environmental impact statement. The EIS will determine how Columbia River System operations is configured and operates into the future. Before we begin gathering your comments, let's first talk about how CRSO works. CRSO projects include features such as dams, reservoirs, navigation locks, fish ladders, turbines, and other associated infrastructure. The projects serve a broad range of congressionally authorized purposes, such as flood risk management, irrigation, navigation, power generation, fish and wildlife conservation, municipal and industrial water supply, and recreation. To address all of those needs and effectively manage the system, the three federal agencies must continually coordinate their efforts. During day-to-day operations, the three agencies have different responsibilities. The Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation operate and maintain the federal projects, while BPA markets and transmits electricity from the dams. In an effort to conduct a thorough and productive public scoping process of the CRSO, the federal agencies are holding public scoping meetings in communities across the Pacific Northwest in the fall of 2016. Additionally, 2 webinar meetings will be held for people who cannot attend the public meetings. You can find the times and locations of the meetings on our website at www.crso.info. You can also ask to be included on our mailing list by sending us your contact information at info@crso.info. By offering your insights on alternatives that should be considered and analyzed, you can help focus the environmental review on issues that are important to your community and the region. To learn more about the CRSO while at the public meetings, we encourage you to review the educational materials provided and talk to our subject matter experts. In addition, educational materials are available on the project website, or feel free to email questions to us online. During the public scoping period, there are several ways to submit comments. You can talk to a public meeting stenographer who will write down your comments verbatim for the record. You can use a public meeting comment form and turn it in at one of the 15 meetings. You can make your comments online through our website, email your comments, or send them to us via the U.S. Postal Service. To ensure your comments are considered, you must submit them during the public scoping period, which ends January 17, 2017. Once the public scoping phase has ended, the federal agencies will consider all comments and use them to develop the CRSO Environmental Impact Statement. When a draft of the EIS is complete, the agencies will again seek public comment before making the EIS final. The entire CRSO review process is expected to take about 5 years. We appreciate your interest in contributing to the environmental review of Columbia River System operations. Your comments will help shape the development of the EIS, which will ultimately help inform decisions that affect the future of the entire region. Thank you.
The following video presentation is a collection of informational poster boards that were created for the Columbia River System Operations Scoping meetings this fall. There are 21 poster boards representing a specific facet of the CSRO. The information here is comprised of short summaries focusing on key aspects of each board. It's the same information subject matter experts from each of the action agencies conveyed to the public, media, and stakeholders at each meeting. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, enacted by Congress in 1970, established a broad national environmental policy that requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on the environment. In the case of the Columbia River System Operations, or CRSO, 3 federal agencies under NEPA are preparing what is called an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, which will evaluate the potential effects of their system operations on both the human and the natural environment. The EIS process begins with what is called scoping, which is the current status of the process. Scoping is defined as, quote, an early and open process for determining the scope of issues to be addressed in an EIS and for identifying issues and concerns that are important to the public. The public can shape the federal agency's analysis of the EIS throughout the scoping period. To provide valuable input during scoping, please submit a comment that identifies resource issues and/or alternatives of concern to you in relation to the Columbia River System operations. Comments should provide a rational basis for consideration of issues, components of alternatives, and/or alternatives. Agencies will then utilize the information gathered during scoping to prepare the draft EIS, which is planned to be released for public review in late 2019 or early 2020. At that time, federal agencies will conduct additional public involvement on the draft EIS, which will inform the development of the final EIS and record of decision that the agencies will eventually adopt. Thank you for your participation. The federal agencies welcome and appreciate your comments throughout this public scoping period. Both NEPA and Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act require federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on cultural resources. Cultural resources include archaeological sites, traditional cultural properties valued by Native American tribes and other communities, and other historic properties such as buildings and structures. The action agencies have already identified more than 4,000 cultural resources near the 14 dams and reservoirs that are being considered as part of this EIS. The action agencies invite comments from the public about the importance of cultural resources in their communities and how these cultural resources could be adversely affected by changes. The Columbia River System is large and complex, and the federal projects are operated to meet many authorized purposes. The multiple uses must be considered and balanced in operational decisions. Actions that benefit one use or resource can have the opposite effect on others. The Columbia River System has 2 types of water projects, storage and run-of-river. Storage projects hold water in the reservoir and then reshape the river flow to meet a variety of authorized purposes. Storage projects help reduce potentially damaging floods downstream while also providing valuable water during dry periods. These projects are generally located higher in the basin, near the mountains, where they can strategically capture snowmelt for flood risk management purposes. Run-of-river projects have limited storage and generally pass the water as it comes in. They provide power generation and navigation opportunities through navigation locks and reservoirs. The focus of the Columbia River System operations can change depending on what time of year it is. In the fall and winter, storage projects begin preparing for the upcoming spring runoff period. As snow accumulates in the mountains, reservoir levels are lowered to be able to catch snowmelt in the spring. Generally, in the fall and winter, natural river flows are low, and the evacuation of water from the reservoirs adds water to the rivers. In the spring, mountain snowmelt begins, and the projects reduce outflows and capture high inflows to help provide flood damage protection downstream. In the spring, the storage projects begin to refill. During this time of year, the system is operated primarily to manage spring runoff for flood risk management, store water for irrigation use later in the season, and provide conditions to aid juvenile and adult fish migration. Storage reservoirs typically reach their highest water surface elevation in the summer months. Valuable water stored during the spring can then be released in the summer to help augment flows for fish in the lower Columbia and lower Snake rivers. In the summer months, the system is operated to provide additional flow for augmentation downstream to aid juvenile and adult fish migration, provide water for irrigation use, and to generate power. In all seasons, operators must also provide a safe navigation corridor, generate power, and protect wildlife habitat and cultural resources. The Columbia River flow varies widely and has resulted in severe flooding before and after the dams were in place. With enough reservoir space to store only about 30% of the water in the river on average, it is a balance to manage high flows for flood risk, and it's impossible to prevent flooding under all conditions. Each storage reservoir manages natural flow for flood risk reduction directly downstream of the project, as well as managing flows in conjunction with other storage reservoirs for the lower Columbia River, such as Portland or Vancouver, and other lower river areas. The amount of space created in a storage reservoir each winter depends on the volume of water that is predicted or forecasted to run off from the snowpack, and potential rain events the following spring and early summer. Ideally, we would create just enough space to capture damaging flows and refill the reservoirs to be full for summer. However, it's impossible to accurately predict the exact amount of space required months in advance. This difficulty, combined with only being able to store 30% of the water in the river, are some of the complex parts of managing a large and diverse river system. Power from the dams is delivered to local and regional utilities via the transmission system. Local utilities then distribute the power to homes and businesses via distribution lines. Hydropower provides the bulk of generating capacity in the region. The Columbia River system operations alone constitute about 35% of total regional capacity. In total, these 14 dams generate enough electricity to power about 7 million homes. Dams convert potential energy of stored water into electricity. Hydroelectric generation is determined by snowpack and rainfall and varies from year to year. Seasonal variation in generation occurs due to the timing of snowmelt and rainfall. Storage projects allow some water to be stored for later use. Hydropower generation has the capability to provide both baseload generation and peaking generation. Baseload generation is the energy produced continuously to serve base-level energy needs. Peaking generation is energy produced to meet peak demand requirements, and demand is energy required by homes and businesses that the various generation sources must supply. Hydropower's flexibility allows it to raise and lower generation for integration of intermittent renewables and unanticipated outages. Hydropower's flexibility, or ability to change output rapidly, provides the capability to offset fluctuations in wind generation or other intermittent resources, such as solar. Without flexible backup generation, wind generation could not match the energy needs of homes and businesses. Every year, an equivalent amount of natural gas generation would produce 41 million tons of CO2, that is equal to burning 4.6 billion gallons of gasoline. Water transportation has an advantage over moving the same products by rail or truck due to the lower fuel consumption required to move the volume of transported goods. The Columbia River System navigation is operated using deep drafts for ocean-going ships up to Vancouver, Washington, and then through lock systems up to the Tri-Cities area on the Columbia, and then up to Lewiston, Idaho on the Snake River. An average of 57 million tons of commodities were transported in 2010 through 2014, which would have required transport by over 2 million semi-trucks. Of that, approximately 36.6 million tons were exported to foreign destinations, or about 64%. Some of the top exports are wheat, oilseeds like soybean, flaxseed, and others, lumber, and corn. The top imports include iron and steel products, manufactured equipment, and building material like sand, gravel, stone, building cement, and concrete. Recreation was not specifically identified as a major project use when most of the dams were authorized, but was recognized as an important public resource during later legislation. Northwest residents enjoy recreational opportunities at projects throughout the Columbia River Basin. A diverse range of recreational opportunities and facilities such as boating, swimming, fishing, water skiing, and windsurfing are located on and near our reservoirs. Irrigation is an authorized purpose for many reclamation projects, and reclamation delivers water to several irrigation projects from the Columbia River, including the Columbia Basin Project, Chief Joseph Dam, the Dalles, and Umatilla projects, Phases 1 and 2. Reclamation's Columbia River System Operation irrigation projects serve more than 760,000 acres. In addition to federal irrigation projects, there are several private irrigators who pump water from the reservoir pools behind Army Corps of Engineers dams. The 8 lower Columbia and Snake River dams include structures and operations that facilitate the passing of fish upstream and downstream. Ladders, which allow upstream passage, were built during the 1930s through the 1980s. Over the past 2 decades, many modifications have been installed at the lower 8 dams to improve downstream passage for juvenile salmon and steelhead. These include the installation of surface passage routes at all dams, screen bypass systems, and modification of spillway and powerhouse operation. Installation of these juvenile fish passage improvements has increased the percent of juvenile salmonids that survive passage at Lower Columbia and Snake River dams. Juvenile salmon and steelhead percent survival now generally ranges from the mid to high 90s at each dam. The action agencies are also restoring fish habitat and implementing predator control measures at dams and throughout the basin to improve survival for salmon and steelhead. Habitat restoration work has opened salmon and steelhead access to 3,300 miles of tributary habitat and restored or enhanced 42 miles of tidal channels in the Columbia River estuary. Predation on juvenile salmon and steelhead by northern pike minnow has been reduced by about 40%, or about 4.5 million fish, since initiation of the management program in 1990. Predation on juvenile salmon and steelhead by inland and estuary colonies of fish-eating birds has also been reduced since initiation of predator management programs in those areas. Hazing of fish-eating birds at Lower Snake and Columbia River dams and sea lions at Bonneville Dam occurs annually to reduce predator success at preying on salmon and steelhead as they pass these dams. In addition to operations and modifications to dams that benefit listed salmon and steelhead, specific operations are implemented at dams for ESA-listed and non-listed resident and anadromous species, including Kootenai white sturgeon, kokanee, Pacific lamprey, bull trout, and burbot. Collectively, the passage improvements at dams, habitat restoration, and predator management benefit more than just ESA-listed salmon and steelhead. Non-listed fish like mid-Columbia River fall chinook, resident trout, and Pacific lamprey benefit as well. Weather data collected since the late 1800s have shown an increase in average temperatures for the Columbia River Basin, as well as the rest of the planet. Climate change is projected to continue and accelerate as global emissions increase. Seasonal snowpack, a natural reservoir, is likely to decrease, to a large extent in the U.S., less in Canada. These changes will be linked to higher natural flows in the winter, an earlier runoff peak, and lower natural summer flows. Federal agencies are continuing to study future adaptation options. Salmon have a complex life cycle and can be affected in numerous ways. The cycle begins in fresh water when a red, or a female's nest of eggs, is fertilized. These eggs remain in the gravel throughout the winter, and the embryos develop. In the spring, the eggs hatch and the young fish emerge as alevins. Eggs and alevins need good water quality and healthy spawning gravels to survive. Once the alevins use up their yolk sac, they're called fry. The fry need habitat to feed and grow in fresh water until environmental cues tell them it's time to prepare for the journey back to the ocean. Known as, quote, smoltification, at this time they become silvery colored. Their bodies change to make them adapted to life in salt water, and they follow the river downstream to the ocean, passing several dams on the way. Birds and other fish prey on smolts during this migration. Some young salmon spend time in the estuary habitat, where the freshwater and saltwater meet. Salmon spend most of their lives in the ocean, so the conditions they encounter there have a far-reaching effect on their survival. In particular, scientists have observed that cyclic variations in the survival of salmon in the ocean often correspond with ocean temperature changes. Cold ocean temperatures are good for salmon. They're important for much of the plant and animal life in the ocean that salmon rely on for food. Climate and its impact on ocean currents and temperatures is so important to salmon's survival, particularly during their vulnerable first year in the ocean, that scientists can predict adult salmon returns to the Columbia River based upon the ocean conditions the year they migrated out to sea. After maturing in the ocean, adult salmon return upstream to lay their eggs in the same streams where they were born, using fish ladders to migrate upstream past the dams on the Columbia River. During this upstream journey, the adults are vulnerable to predators such as sea lions as well as harvest by people. After spawning, the adult salmon die, and their bodies enrich the freshwater habitats with nutrients. Returning adult salmon have been counted at fish ladders at the Columbia River dams since they were constructed. Ladder counts shown here include both hatchery and wild fish, leading to the sharply increasing trend since hatchery programs began augmenting the natural populations. Recent counts are higher than when dam counts first began. Many factors have adversely affected salmon and steelhead for well over a century, and many improvements have likely led to recently increasing returns. Species-level abundance is an important indicator for monitoring populations of listed salmonids under the ESA. These abundance graphs show only natural origin fish. Hatchery fish are not included, with the exception of Snake River sockeye, which is sustained through a captive broodstock program. Since they were listed in the early 1990s, most populations show an increasing trend in abundance of natural origin salmon and steelhead. Pacific lamprey are an important resource to the tribes and an ecologically important native species. Like salmon, the Pacific lamprey are anadromous, meaning that they spend all or part of their adult life in the ocean and return to freshwater streams or rivers to spawn. They are a native species that range from Southern California up to Alaska. Unlike salmon, lamprey do not necessarily return to the streams where they were born, but rather are attracted by smell to tributaries where other young lamprey are rearing. Young lamprey grow in the tributary habitats for about 4 to 7 years before transforming to migrate back out to the ocean. Counts of Pacific lamprey have shown steep declines from historical numbers, but recent trends are increasing. The Kootenai River white sturgeon occurs in Idaho, Montana, and Canada. They can be found along a 170-mile stretch of the Kootenai River from Kootenai Falls, Montana, downstream through Kootenai Lake to Canada. Approximately 45% of the species range is located within Canada. Bull trout are found across much of the Columbia River Basin and may be resident or migratory. Resident bull trout spend their entire lives in the same stream or creek, while migratory bull trout move to larger bodies of water to winter and then migrate back to smaller waters to reproduce. Compared to other salmonids, bull trout have more specific habitat requirements that appear to influence their distribution and abundance. They need cold water to survive, so they're seldom found in waters where temperatures exceed 59 to 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Water temperature management is achieved through the strategic use of selective withdrawal structures at Dworshak, Libby, and Hungry Horse dams to provide improved downstream habitat for native and anadromous fish species. Dworshak, Libby, and Hungry Horse reservoirs warm each summer at the surface due to solar radiation. However, because of their large size and lack of vertical mixing, the reservoirs are thermally stratified with warm water staying on top and cool water sinking to the bottom. At Dworshak, this deep cold water layer is used to cool off the lower Snake River at Lower Granite Dam for fish and other aquatic organisms. The remaining 11 federal reservoirs in the Columbia River system either do not strongly stratify or do not contain enough cold water to provide significant cooling downstream. Thus, they are not used for downstream water temperature management like Dworshak, Libby, and Hungry Horse dams. Total dissolved gas, or TDG, is generated when air becomes trapped in water through the deep plunging of water released through non-turbine dam outlets, such as spillways or regulating outlets. The problem with excessive TDG is that it can harm or even cause death to fish or other aquatic organisms, much like the bends in a deep water diver. Non-turbine outlets are commonly used during the juvenile fish passage season, April through August, and also during high flow events in the spring. The amount of TDG produced from non-turbine outlet discharges can vary and depends on flow amounts, outlet configurations, and environmental factors, such as water temperature. The Corps works to balance the spill for fish passage with the TDG production of that spill. TDG is continuously monitored throughout the Columbia River system for use in daily operational decision-making. Many Columbia River system dams have been retrofitted with TDG abatement structures, such as flow deflectors, that are used to redirect spill, broadcasting flow out along the surface rather than plunging deep into the river below, lowering the TDG. There are 14 projects in the Columbia River system operated by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation. There are 6 storage dams: Hungry Horse, Libby, Dworshak, Albany Falls, Grand Coulee, and John Day. Each are managed for hydropower, flood risk management, and other purposes and uses. There are 8 run-of-the-river dams: Chief Joseph, Lower Granite, Little Goose, Lower Monumental, Ice Harbor, McNary, Bonneville, and the Dalles. Each are managed for hydropower and other purposes and uses that benefit the community. Thank you for your participation. The federal agencies welcome and appreciate your comments throughout this public scoping period. Please submit them to via email, comment@crso.info, through the website at www.crso.info, or by mail at U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Attention, CRSO EIS, P.O. Box 2870, Portland, Oregon, 97208-2870.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this will begin the question and answer portion of our call. And just as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, you will need to go back into the web browser tab where you have AT&T Connect opened, and then go down to the right-hand corner of your screen where it says where the notes feature is located, and then you can submit a question by typing your question into that box you see there, and then address your notes to all moderators. So again, that's the notes feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and then address your notes to all moderators. And we'll give it just a moment to see if any questions come through from the audience. Just as another quick reminder, you can use the notes feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to type in a question. First question we have is, where can I get a copy of these videos?
Okay, these videos will be on our website in their entirety. The videos also show the boards that we used at all of our public meetings, which are also available at the website if you saw something interesting and you wanted to go back and be able to read through it at your leisure.
Okay, we'll just give it another few moments to let any other questions come through. Just a reminder for those in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, you can go back to the web browser tab where you have AT&T Connect opened, and then go down to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you can use the notes feature to type in a question. We do have another question from the audience. It says, during the navigation section, I heard that lower fuel consumption results from using the locks. It does not seem that the cost of foregone electric power production is included when making this statement.
So this is a great comment for them to add, to go onto the website and post it as a comment for us to review as part of the study.
Okay, looks like we have received a few more questions. Next question we have is, how will the CRSO EIS be coordinated with the CRT and the 2018 BIOP?
Hi, this is Dave Kennedy from Bonneville Power Administration. I think we're on the current question of how will it be coordinated with Columbia River Treaty and the BIOP. Columbia River Treaty's concurrent process that's going on with led by the State Department, U.S. State Department. We'll see how that process goes. They are the lead agency. If there are eventual changes out of that process that affects system operations, we'll of course address it during the life of this particular project. At this point, they're current processes. The 2018 BIOP is a part of this process. The two analyses will be coordinated. What we show in the EIS and what we intend to show in the BIOP should mirror each other as we go through this process. EIS will inform the BIOP. Very similar question. They're concurrent together processes, and we're coordinating with NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on those. We will be coordinating on those analyses, and you will see those analyses reflected in both documents.
Next question I have is, how will the EIS inform the BIOP, the BIOP?
I think we addressed that as part of their concurrent processes, and you'll see the analysis in both documents. Next question.
Okay, and I am being asked to reread a question we had earlier. It says, during the navigation section, I heard that lower fuel consumption results from using the locks. It does not seem that the cost of foregone electric power production is included when making this statement.
This is Cheryl Karuba answering your question. The authorized use of the locks is the use of the locks in navigation is part of the authorized use of the project, and it's not really a matter of just trading navigation off against hydropower. It's a matter of all of the uses being used together. So if that's a particular question that you would like to have answered, the impacts to hydropower for any of the authorized use could be examined in the EIS, but hydropower is really just one of the multi-purposes of those projects. Hopefully that makes more sense.
Okay, and we will move now to our next question. It says, what are the primary motivators for those that propose breaching these dams?
That's a good question. We can't speculate on why people are motivated, but based on comments we have received to date, people are looking at different ways of balancing the authorized purposes. Fish passage seems to be a concern that many people that are asking for looking at an alternative of dam breaching have voiced.
Okay, the next question I see is, Lake Count, Montana requested cooperator status. Where is that in the process?
Currently, this is Sonia Kokas with the Bureau of Reclamation. Currently, we are just finishing our cooperating agency timeline, which actually closed on December 9th, and we'll be looking at that group of requests, and we'll be getting back to those groups that are interested sometime in January.
Okay, next we have, how are the non-federal projects reflected in your analyses?
Currently, we're at the stage of scoping, and we're looking to the public to provide input on the scope of this project.
Okay, next question we have is, I heard since listing most ESUs must have seen an increase in abundance. I recall the current BIOP using other metrics besides abundance. Are these other metrics still important?
Hi, Mike Langsley, Corps of Engineers. We presented abundance on, and you probably saw them in the video, on some of our posters, and you can see those online in a couple ways, one by both hatchery and wild fish, and then by specific listed population of salmon and steelhead. And there are other metrics that NOAA Fisheries looks at besides abundance, including population growth rates and extinction risk, and yes, other metrics are important as well. So that would be a good comment to submit, because that would relate to our analysis.
Okay, the next question we have is, local tax reviews are impacted from habitat acquisition projects by BPA, et cetera. How much more info do you need to incorporate this as an issue?
This is Jason Sweet with Bonneville Power. The tax revenue issue, excuse me, is an important issue that we consider with our habitat projects. Any concerns that folks have if we're incorporating tax revenue impacts appropriately, or if there's anything else we should be considering, that would also be a welcome comment. But it is an issue that we are aware of and track very closely.
Next question is confirming the EIS timeframe will therefore be the same as the BIOP 2018 question?
Hi, this is Rebecca Weiss with the Corps of Engineers. No, that is not correct. The EIS will be in its draft form in 2019 and the final in 2020 with a record of decision in 2021.
Okay, the next question we have is, were there biological inventories of the Snake River wetlands, riparian areas, and vernal pools prior to the construction of the 4 lower Snake dams?
We're going to take that question and get back to you on that one. We don't have that information in front of us. It'll be on the website.
Okay, next is, will the action agencies consider restoring fish passage and migration at Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee dams to address climate change?
So this is Jason Sweet from Bonneville Power again. Again, that is a question and related to the scope of this project that is more than welcome. There are some initial steps that have been taken under the Northwest Power Conservation Council program as well, looking at some of the habitat above Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee. So there's work underway on that process. But again, incorporating that into the scope of this NEPA process would be a welcome comment.
Okay, next we have upstream storage impacts all downstream operations. What memos or agreements exist or are being investigated to address this issue?
So this is Julie Emmon with the Corps of Engineers. All of our storage projects were authorized by Congress for various multi-purposes, including flood risk management, hydropower. There's many, many other pieces. And so as those went in place, we developed operational plans, water control manuals to operate those projects. And as the system was being built together, project operations for the whole system sort of developed along those lines. I'm not exactly sure what memos or agreements you might be referring to. We do have a lot of documentation on those water control plans and the flood risk management operations for those upstream storage reservoirs. So hopefully that sort of answers your question.
Okay, the next question we have is, we are wondering about the impacts on irrigation, including costs, schedules, and availability of water, as they are all significant parts of our local economy.
Hi, this is Eric Ross with Reclamation, and that's a very good question, observation. At this point, we're just describing how things operate currently. That would be a great comment to submit as a recommendation of how to assess impacts on irrigation as part of our study process.
Okay, next we have, how can the EIS and BIOP mirror each other if the EIS already comes several years after the BIOP?
This is Sonia Kokos with the Bureau of Reclamation. Carl, that's a very good question. These are two different processes. The EIS is looking at whatever we scope during this period of time, and the 2018 BIOP that you're thinking of, that is a different biological opinion that we consider right now because we don't know what this EIS is. So we have the 2018 BIOP, and then we have this EIS process. And then through this EIS process, we may or may not have a new BIOP. It depends on what comes out of the EIS process. So there are two different things.
Next question we have is, why do you suppose it is estimated that this CRSO process will take 5 years to complete?
This is Rebecca Weiss. So the NEPA is a process, and we're doing it over the entire Pacific Northwest. Essentially, the Columbia Basin is a large area with many rivers and tributaries, and we're looking at the 7 or 8 different authorized purposes of each of the 14 projects on these rivers, based on the scale and the requirement to not piecemeal, but to do a comprehensive analysis. The EIS is a very aggressive 5-year schedule. The draft's going to be out in 2 years, and the 3 agencies are leveraging their resources to make that schedule. Right now, we're in a scoping process that ends on January 17th with public comments that we will then pull together along with cooperating agencies to develop into alternatives, to identify the issues and the resources that we need to investigate in great detail, and put that together to demonstrate what we will have as a scoping summary that at around September timeframe of 2017, we will provide back for public review so people understand how your comments have influenced the scope of the study and the type of alternatives that we intend to move forward with. So that's our schedule for next year. And then it's evaluation. It will take another year to actually run the models, develop the models, run the models and do the assessment themselves, and then compile the document. So, you know, beyond putting the draft EIS out, we need to make sure we have ample opportunity for the public and other agencies as well to come and review the EIS itself and provide us with any comments or concerns they have on the draft analysis that we have provided. That takes time as well, just like the scoping period and public workshops took several months. We will have many months of public review that we will then have to incorporate back into our document and consider before going out with a final document. So that takes 5 years. This is based, again, on the scale of this project and the 3 agencies, 20 years, 30 years worth of looking at how long it has taken us to do these type of documents in the past. So hopefully that addresses your concern.
Okay, just a quick reminder for the audience, if you would like to ask a question, you can do so by using the notes feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And the next question we have is, what steps or strategies will be included in the base plan to accommodate, preserve, and potentially expand the opportunities for recreation on the Flathead River, Swan River, Hungry Horse Reservoir, and Flathead Lake?
Hi, this is Eric Ross with Reclamation, and good question. Again, we're just describing at this point, being in the scoping process, how we currently operate. If you're concerned about resources such as recreation, that would be an excellent comment to submit or a recommendation on how to study the system operations.
Okay, next we have, I hear a response as, 3 agencies are leveraging their resources to make this aggressive schedule. Is it possible for more resources, parentheses, manpower, to be added so as to decrease the 5-year timeline? Perhaps it doesn't matter how much manpower is added and that the 5-year timeline schedule is fixed.
Thanks. This is Rebecca Weiss with the Corps. It is not an issue of manpower. It is an issue of data collection and model development in order to capture the entire basin. Certainly, in some things you can pile more people and make things, happen, and we have been able to accommodate that, but we wouldn't be able to add more and suddenly make model development, inventory, and assessment go faster. So 5 years is something that is in the court as part of Judge Simon's orders, and it is something that the agencies are going to stick to.
Okay, next question. It's a long one. It says, lands purchased by BPA, Corps, etc. for wetlands mitigation or habitat mitigation here resulted in significant property tax losses to our schools and local government. What strategy to mitigate or restore or replace this lost revenue will be incorporated in the basin strategy? This problem is compounded by lands placed in trust for or by local tribes, thereby eliminating the lands from our property taxes. What solution to this problem will be incorporated in the basin strategy?
Hello, this is John Tyler from the Bonneville Power Administration. I don't necessarily have a solution to provide, but I'll provide an explanation, and that is that when lands are purchased with BPA funds for mitigation for the construction and operation of federal dams and mitigate for the impacts on habitat, many of the property owners across the Columbia River Basin that purchase those properties with BPA funds and become the new owners will continue to pay local property tax, fee in lieu of taxes as a voluntary measure. We know in some cases that that's not what the new landowners choose to do, but that is a voluntary decision that they can make. We'd also like to point out that there may be, as you pointed out, a reduction in taxes to the local government, but we also want people to recognize that there's a big economic incentive and economic positive impact in many of these communities, because when the land gets transferred into new ownership, there's oftentimes management opportunities which require employment and jobs. So there's many people that are working on these properties to restore them and restore the habitat values, and those projects are oftentimes very expensive to do and rely heavily on local contractors to provide that type of those services. And we see a trickle down within the local communities, because not only is there heavy equipment operating, but there's lots of ancillary costs, such as buying the fuel to run those machines, and then the food that feeds the crew. So we see that there's a lot of local economic impacts that are positive to small communities. So in balance, we see that there's an impact to local tax base, but there's also positive benefit from many of the economic spin-offs that come from that.
Okay, next we are wondering on the strategy or strategies that will be used to mitigate the effects of disputes about or calls upon these waters by downstream users or needs for power, fisheries, or irrigation.
So this is Julie Ammon again with Corps of Engineers. So right now we're looking at the operation of the 14 federal projects, and we're looking for input on different alternatives that might be suggested. That could be for operations for recreation or for fish or navigation. So we're looking for that input. The other piece we're looking for is input on the types of metrics that we want to use to evaluate alternatives. So if, for example, you're really interested in impacts to hydropower to keep point in the river system, you could maybe put that in as a comment for us to consider, because I think that's going to really help us shape our analysis and develop the tools. So I don't have the answer on necessarily what strategies will we be using, but knowing that you have an interest on downstream uses for power, fisheries, or irrigation, that's important feedback that we can then use as we shape our analysis and as we evaluate these alternatives and try to decide if alternative A is better than alternative B. So hopefully that helps To answer the question, we're not necessarily looking at changing operations for the non-14 dams. So what was released in the headwater projects, for example, from Hungry Horse or Libby, will be ran through the system, and we're not necessarily proposing operational changes at non-federal dams. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Okay, next we have the other dams in our drainage and storage facilities, i.e. reservoirs, impact the basin. What discussions or strategies to address those will be included in the plan?
So this is Julie Ammon again. So it kind of goes back to the last answer. We're focusing on the operation of our federal projects and making adjustments and changes to those, not necessarily putting proposed changes in for non-federal dams. We will be looking potentially at impacts to those as we develop the metrics, things like megawatts or flow rates or reservoir elevations. We can quantify that, but I believe we're not necessarily looking at changes to those project operations at this time. It's outside the scope of this EIS.
Okay, at the moment I'm not seeing any additional questions in the question queue. Just a quick reminder, you can use the notes feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you would like to submit a question today. Okay, looks like another question has been submitted. The question is, how will the increase in intermittent power like solar and wind over the next 5 years influence the analysis?
Hi, this is Peter Williams with the Bonneville Power Administration. As far as the actual analysis goes, any of the power side modeling or production cost analysis that we do will have a forecast build of both of all renewables wet-wide. So our projected wind and solar forecasts will be included in those analyses going out. And as far as what we expect that to do, that will have certain impacts on, obviously on wholesale electricity markets, as well as requirements of the hydro system to provide balancing reserves, and those will all be included in the analysis. So your second comment, intermittent power will increase the demand for hydro balancing capacity, perhaps, and cause changes to operations. Yes, the amount of wind, and at least in, I can speak to Bonneville's control area, will impact the amount of balancing reserves that are held by the hydro system, and that will be accounted for based upon projected interconnections within our control area. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we did receive another question that says, it needs to be understood that how you operate the federal dams as adjusted will affect the other structures and user of the drainage. How will that be mitigated?
This is Sonia Kokos with Bureau of Reclamation. That is a great question, and that would be a good comment to submit in terms of we need to look at the effect of the other structures and the effects of user of the drainage. And how will that be mitigated? That's a question that will be answered if that is one of the alternatives in the actual study. We don't know what that answer would be today because we haven't studied that to then essentially figure out how we would then mitigate, because we don't know what we're mitigating.
One thing that always needs to be mentioned is if you start at the mouth of the Columbia and take the largest of each confluence, you end up in Polson, Montana. How do we get considered?
So Gail, this is Julie Ammon again with the Corps. I guess I'd just like to reiterate that as we're embarking on this process where we have to select tools and look at alternatives and decide on what our metrics are so we can evaluate these. If you have input that you want to provide to us, I would suggest that you enter that in because that's very helpful feedback for us. So if you have some key points of interest within the basin or things that you really want us to consider, I would recommend putting that in as a comment so that we can capture that as part of the process. I'm not entirely sure I fully understand everything that's behind your comments, but that would be my recommendation. You're obviously very interested in a certain area in the basin and downstream probably of a federal project and really interested in what that's going to mean. So if there's things that you want us to consider, I would put that in as a comment. That's the best I can offer right now.
At the moment, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the question queue.
Well then, thank you, Colin, for hosting this for us and for everybody calling in and participating. On your screen, you should have the different ways that you can submit official comments to help scope this study, and we encourage you to do so, and look forward to moving forward with your input and influence on our EIS. Thank you.